Hey listeners, I'm your host, Juan Collado Díaz, and this is Político. Hey listeners, and welcome once again to another episode of Político. I am your host, Juan Collado Díaz, and today with me I have John Kruse. He's a neuroscientist, psychiatrist, and an author of the book, Recognizing Adult ADHD, What Donald Trump Can Teach Us About Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. With 25 years of psychiatry experience, Dr. Kruse specialized in treating adults with ADHD. And one of the things that he is talking with me today about is about Trump Derangement Syndrome. Something that you may have heard me speaking with Dr. Carol Lieberman. She spoke in how it is real and how it can happen. But Dr. John Kruse disagrees with her and wants to share why he thinks otherwise. So without further ado, Dr. Kruse, do you mind sharing a little bit about you, the work you have done, and why do you think Trump Derangement Syndrome is not a real psychological problem and more of a way to gaslight people?
So I had earned an Ph.D. in neuroscience and then went through training to become a psychiatrist in San Francisco. I was working primarily with adults with ADHD, and I could tell you how I got into that if that's pertinent. And I've written a book on ADHD. And as I was promoting the book, that was when COVID shut everything down. So I learned that I had to get my word out elsewhere. So I started producing videos, mostly about adult ADHD, but also about a broader mental health range of topics. And those are on YouTube. So I have more than 200 informative videos. I also write on Medium platforms. So I have more than 300 articles there for the general public, trying to make health, but specifically mental health, and a lot of focus on ADHD more understandable to the general public. I'm also a Distinguished Life Fellow of the American Psychiatric Association, which is the sort of highest general level of respect or honor. I've worked with lots of people on Medicare, Medicaid, with low-fee clinics in San Francisco that worked on providing mental health services to people. And 3 years ago, I moved to Hawaii, so most of my work now is done remotely. So.
Oh, that sounds fun. Hawaii sounds very fun. When I saw it, I was like, oh, he's probably living a good life with no cold, all warm. I'm in Cleveland, so I get the mix of all weathers here. So in my last interview, I interviewed Dr. Carol Lieberman, and she talks about something called Trump Derangement Syndrome. And while I was researching it, I came across one of your articles, and you also talk about that. And can you explain a little bit your view on what is called Trump Derangement Syndrome, and can you share a little bit more where it came from and why is it used now?
Yes, so I wrote about it in response to, there was a sort of a media kerfluffle a few weeks back when some Minnesota state representatives proposed a law in Minnesota that would codify Trump Derangement Syndrome as a legal condition. And that just seemed so ludicrous to me because, one, lawmakers don't get to decide whether mental health conditions exist or not. Two, Trump Derangement Syndrome is not an officially recognized condition, and it's in no position to be recognized as one. I mean, we do have a condition called delusional disorder, which there may be overlap with. And three, because, I mean, the intent of our mental health diagnostic system is to understand what's going on, to help predict behaviors in an individual or the future outcome, and to help them. And it's pretty clear that as used, this Trump Derangement Syndrome is not intended for any of those purposes, which is, again, further why it's not ever going to be recognized. And in this political climate, when so much is being inappropriately weaponized, I think the mental health community should stand firmly against weaponizing mental health diagnoses.
So do you think, because from a mental health perspective, I guess, with this creating this is more of a way to like gaslight people that are against Trump? Or is there a possibility in any way, shape, or form that this is like actually there's people that have hated Trump so much and they have become mentally ill because of that?
So it's probably good to, and I have written down some of the definition is proposed by these Republican legislators in Minnesota, and they defined it as, quote, the inability to distinguish between legitimate policy differences and signs of psychic pathology in Donald J. Trump's behavior. And then they characterized the symptoms could be either intense hostility toward Trump or overt aggression or violence against any of his supporters. So that's what they're proposing exists. And I don't deny that there are some people who behave this way. What I see on online forums or in public discussions or elsewhere, where people are using this, they're using it in a way that's actually completely antithetical to what's been stated there. Most of the people I hear who are complaining about Trump are either directly, explicitly condemning policies that are cruel, unconstitutional, inhumane, just generally stupid or inconsistent, but they're focused on their policy. Or there's some individuals who are condemning him for personality traits that they perceive in him, whether it's his greed, whether it's his corruption, whether it's his ignorance, whether it's his malevolence. Some of it may be making assumptions about him, but I don't often see anyone confusing policy differences with his behavior. And what I thought was particularly telling and almost humorous in these, again, these are MAGA supporters, one of whom is actually since resigned from the Senate, Minnesota Senate, because they're involved in a sex scandal soliciting an underage person. So they clearly have some of their own mental health issues. But the way they wrote it is that they are actually acknowledging that Donald J. Trump has signs of psychic pathology. They didn't say alleged signs. They are acknowledging the guy has clearly mental health problems. And supposedly some people are failing to distinguish those from policy. That, again, I think some people are so enraged and upset that they may fit that criteria, but I think most of the people that I've heard objecting are, again, either clearly describing policy differences or clearly describing Trump's behavior, either one of which they think make him either an incompetent or dangerous or lousy president. So the employment that I see of the label is a common, it's a shoot the messenger. It's if you don't have any effective argument to come back against the content of what the person says, then, and it's worked pretty well for Trump. You just attack the person for their own personality or their own observed problems or deficits without ever addressing the substance of what's been proposed to you. And the sad thing is, in the short run, that approach can work. In the long run, given that it doesn't address the content of what the person is saying, shooting the messenger doesn't get rid of the message. So it's in the long term an ineffective strategy, but in the short term, one that the MAGA crowd has used quite successfully.
So, with this going on right now, we've seen a lot of people, even as I mentioned earlier, my last guest that I have is actually she's a certified psychologist, and she talks to people on a daily basis. And she has had what she claims, quote unquote, are clients, and she have cure from Trump derangement syndrome. She has helped them to go through this mental problem, and now they're, again, quote unquote, cure. Do you think that there's such a thing? And I know you share a little bit about it, but and also, is it a professional thing to bring politics into your line of work as someone who's working with mental health?
So there's a bunch of questions embedded there. To me, if someone is truly delusional, delusions are actually fairly hard to overcome, particularly by talk therapy, because by definition, delusions are not based on rational thought, and they are actually, to be a delusion, actually, you have to have been presented with contrary evidence that you're just not accepting. So for someone, I've had people who came into my office and they were convinced that they were descended from the Russian royal family and that their aunt Anastasia didn't get killed by the Tsar, and they have elaborate stories. And I can describe evidence, forensic evidence, no, this person is really dead, they dug up her body, and it doesn't matter. They're not convinced by evidence. So whether someone just through talking therapy is actually effectively breaking down or getting through someone's delusions? It's possible, but it doesn't seem, if just talking to them makes them more reasonable, then probably they weren't that delusional, and probably they were just agitated or angry or upset or terrified. And, in a moment of excitement, expressing thoughts that they didn't really believe in.
So, and then
getting the topic of should the mental health community be talking about politics, I'd say there's been a long-standing sort of barrier or recommendations, or you don't want to go there, but I would argue what's happening in the political world, and it's not just, what's happening this moment, but this moment particularly, is impossible to disentangle from people's mental health. So, we saw it during the first Trump administration. Rates of anxiety went up, not just in Democrats, they went up in Republicans as well, because this president is so inconsistent with what he says, inconsistent with whether he follows through with what he says, has not done his own research and doesn't know what he's talking about, that even Republicans in the House of Representatives, when a few of them were willing to speak up or say anything, during the first administration, when Trump went to lobby for his only legislative achievement in his first term, which was ramming through tax cuts. Again, we don't have to discuss whether those are good or bad for the economy, but Republicans who are being lobbied by him said, this guy doesn't even know what's in the bill he is lobbying us for. So anxiety went up across the board, maybe more so in Democrats, but it went up specifically because of what's going on in the political realm. And now with, whether your sexual identity can be taken away from you, whether your citizenship can be taken, whether your home can be disrupted, these are impossible to separate out from mental health from political events. So I'm going to jump to the related topic, which is more tied into directly what I'm doing right now. There's a separate prohibition, separate from, so again, when a therapist is working with a client who's upset by the politics, the stance should usually be to listen, to help them understand what the source of their strong emotions or feelings are, and to see if there are other ways for them to consider the situation. It's not to impose the therapist's own beliefs of one guy or party being good or bad on the patient, but it's to help them work through what's a healthy way, how are other people who share your views dealing with this in a healthier way. So it's a separate issue, what I'm sort of doing right here and now, and that is the American Psychiatric Association has a section in its code of ethics stating that a psychiatrist should not be publicly offering a diagnosis about a public individual without a personal one-on-one evaluation of that individual and without that individual's consent. And we can go into why I think ethically that can and should be ignored.
Would you actually mind sharing if that's okay?
Yeah. So, and if I'm going into too much depth, stop me. So that the ethics rule is called the Goldwater Rule. This was so in 1964, Barry Goldwater was considered the first sort of fringe candidate from either party. So he was a quite conservative Republican. And with his candidacy, many people were questioning, is this guy too out there, too out of it to be president? And specifically sort of a muckraking journal, magazine that isn't around anymore, I'm blanking on the name of it, sent a questionnaire to all the members of the American Psychiatric Association at the time. I think there were fewer than 10,000. About 2,000 of them answered it. And so the question was first, is Barry Goldwater mentally competent to be president of the United States? And then it also allowed further commentary on it. So interestingly, the opinion was split almost exactly 50-50. It was I'm not even remember which way it came down. Half of them said this guy is not competent to be president, but even more alarming, the psychiatrists expressed their political opinions couched in psychological and diagnostic terms. And so they were just, several of them said he's a megalomaniac. Several of them said he's a schizophrenic, which is why, he shouldn't be Barry Goldwater shouldn't be president. Some of them even said that he was a latent homosexual, and that was why he. So all these were speculations. They weren't based on evaluating him. And Barry Goldwater actually sued that magazine. He didn't sue the psychiatrist, but he sued the magazine. It took 7 years for it to wind its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. Barry Goldwater actually won his case for libel against that magazine, which I think was already out of business by then. But it embarrassed professional psychiatry so much, they said, because again, all these opinions were published, and it was so clearly they were just rationalizing their own political opinions. And they said, we don't want to be embarrassed like this again. We're going to put this in the law, in a rule of ethics. It's not a law. It's a recommendation. It's an ethical violation if you break it. And so during Trump's first run for office and when he was early in office, there were a number of prominent mental health people who sort of said, we're going to be willing to go on the public record violating this rule because Trump is so dangerous that there's also ethical precepts that if you have a patient who is threatening harm to others, direct specific harm, then you can violate confidentiality in order and notify whoever is appropriate. So maybe there's a reason on that regard. My objection to the ruling is that the ruling is based on an incorrect assumption. And the assumption is that the gold standard for making a psychiatric diagnosis is a one-on-one in-office evaluation. And we have no data that actually supports that view. It's an assertion. It's a commonly accepted claim. But if you look at someone like Trump, and there aren't a lot of other people in this category, we have hundreds of hours of observable behaviors. We have a record covering not just what's going on right now, going back years in time. We have them interacting with a much broader range of, if you're evaluating someone in their office, all you have is you and them. You don't have, are they going to act differently with a woman? Are they going to act differently in a crowd? Are they going to act differently with someone with, from a different background, or that they don't see as friendly, or that they see as friendly, So we have a much broader range of information. We have much greater volume of information. We have information at different times of day, which, that affects how people perform and act. And there are certain diagnoses in the DSM, our official diagnostic manual, with ADHD being predominant among them, which is defined entirely on the basis of observable behaviors. Is a person hyperactive? Is a person inattentive? Is a person impulsive? You don't have to know their motivation. You don't have to know why they're doing that. And for ADHD, there are 18 criteria. An adult only needs to be doing 5 of those, and they have to do them excessively, so way beyond what's normal for their age and cultural background. They have to do them in multiple situations, so it can't just be you act this way in a classroom when the teacher hates you, or just with your parents, but not anywhere else. You have to be doing them in different settings, and they have to be leading to distress or impairment. There's absolutely no basis for denying that Trump meets full criteria for ADHD. It's there. So I would argue, and again, if you had him in the office, he could say, I don't have ADHD. Is that meaningful? It's not. So there's not any information he could present that would bring up another explanation or possibility. So again, the basics of the ethic rule saying that you can't make a diagnosis without a one-on-one evaluation just is not supported by the evidence, again, specifically for ADHD. And then given that you're drawing on information from the public domain, the issue of confidentiality is not there. You are not relying on personal, I'm not revealing something deep, private, personal. It's there in the public domain. So that's why I think ethically we can. And the other half of the argument, not half, but other angle on it is that if trained mental health professionals aren't engaging in this, sort of getting back, should we be, then we're leaving the field to people like MAGA legislators who are creating their own mental health conditions and deciding what we call a mental health disorder or not. That seems ridiculous to be relegating that role. So I think psychiatrists and the rest of mental health have an obligation to be involved in the public dialogue.
So,
and an obligation to do it with transparency regarding what criteria they're using, what data they're using to support that, what certainty they have regarding a diagnosis, and what else the explanations could be there. I think that's all part of a truly ethical stance rather than the American psychiatrics stance, which is to shut up and don't talk about it, and therefore there's no problem.
So, and if I was to, I guess, to ask you without having to go into any depth or breaking any rules, if you were to publicly look at Trump hours and hours of videos, you will be able yourself to diagnose him with some mental issues.
Yeah. So again, my book in 2019, I published a book called Recognizing Adult ADHD: What Donald Trump Can Teach Us About Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. I was a little naive, thinking that people who weren't interested in mental health were interested in Trump. They'd read it and they'd say, "Oh my God, this is my partner. This is my boss." There's lots of undiagnosed ADHD out there, and I thought, it would serve a public mental health function or role and be a teaching opportunity. I think it still can be. When I was doing that, I was careful because other people were charging Trump with narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder. And I will say that the label malignant personality disorder, or malignant narcissism, is not an official diagnosis. It's a term, people use it, but they use it in a pejorative way. There is a narcissistic personality disorder. There is not an official diagnosis of malignant narcissism. So if we're going to use diagnostic terms, we should try to stick to real diagnostic terms. So 5-6 years ago, I was arguing, so some of the people at the time said most of the features of narcissistic personality disorder are also behaviorally based. So can't we make those from a video observation? And they're sort of avoiding the issue that, yes, some of the symptoms are defined in terms of behaviors, but they're always, for personality disorders, explicitly stating that the motivation for those behaviors is because someone doesn't. So for narcissism, it's that they're unable to see or appreciate the humanity of other people, that they're doing X, Y, or Z for their own needs, that they're ignoring others, that they're, again, making themselves so grandiose. So a lot of the behaviors he displayed, but I said we need to be a little careful. Now I am more on the side of he has provided so much direct, compelling evidence telling us directly, I am motivated to do this by this. I don't care that inflation's going up or things are going to cost more. Live with it or deal with not having as many dolls at your Christmas. So I'd say it's hard to claim that his motivation for so many of these attacks. So I think we can validly make, narcissistic personality disorder diagnosis. There's other diagnoses. There's been question, is he also suffering from dementia? And there they have what might be considered more hard evidence based on linguistic analysis and how often he uses, his vocabulary, already meager to begin with, has dropped even further. His sentence construction has deteriorated further than it was 8 years ago and further than you would expect from normal aging. His, the complexity of his grammar, whether one thought follows another, all of those have deteriorated more than you would expect for aging. The challenge is that, maybe he's deteriorated just because we've rewarded him for this level of communication. Maybe it's ADHD, because ADHD overlaps a lot with dementia and that. Or maybe he has something else as well. The definitive ADHD diagnosis used to require brain biopsy or at least brain imaging. We're on the very verge of neurologic groups acknowledging or sanctioning blood tests, which, with up to 90% certainty can confirm a diagnosis. But we that piece of the biological picture for dementia, I'd say we don't have yet, but we can say he is demonstrating changes that are excessive for what we would expect from aging alone.
So, and we talked a little bit about the Goldwater rule. You used to in the past, from some of your videos, I and like public stuff, I saw that you used to use Trump as an example for adult ADHD. Now, I've seen that now in the present you have stopped a little more. Is there a reason
that I'm considering more? I'm so. I mean, some of it's again. I wrote an article years ago that Trump's ADHD throws cold water on the Goldwater rule. My focus initially was just in the ADHD realm, because again, I've worked with adults with ADHD for more than 30 years, although I agree some people are being overdiagnosed or diagnosed when they don't have it. It's still absolutely, unquestionably underdiagnosed or missing it in lots of people. So originally, my focus was on what can we do for the ADHD community? What can we do to identify others out there? But again, so maybe I should back up even further how I wound up writing the first book. So again, I've worked with lots of ADHD individuals for years. And during the campaign against Hillary Clinton, and I can't even pin the year right now, so 2012 or 2016, I'm not. Whichever year.
Hillary was 2016, yeah.
2016. People, particularly during the debates, her face is on the screen behaving one way, his is on the other. And my ADHD patients said, oh my God, he's going off track. He's distracted by this. He's talking and ranting on this and going off. They were seeing there and they're saying, oh my God, that's what other people must see when I'm talking to them. So they recognized their own symptomatology in Donald Trump. And at first, some of it, I'm in the liberal San Francisco at that time, is sort of jokey, he has ADHD. And then when I, again, rechecked all the diagnostic criteria and found that he unequivocally met them, that was sort of the impetus for writing about it. But I wasn't particularly interested in going into the political angle too much, although part of my message also, so my book, I said, was in 3 parts. One part is using Donald Trump to explain ADHD, because in many ways, he's the poster boy for it. He has, so many of these symptoms to such an extreme degree that it's clear and obvious. 2, I was using ADHD to explain Trump, because the people who focused on his narcissism, he doesn't make sense as a pure narcissist. What does a narcissist do? A narcissist, as he said himself, I want to be seen as a stable genius. And yet he does so many things that are clearly not showing any genius and not showing any stability. A narcissist doesn't continually shoot themselves in the foot. But a narcissist with ADHD that has trouble containing their impulses, that can't stay on track, that doesn't do their homework, that adds a level of understanding. So it was very frustrating when I talk about this in social, and I'm a pretty shy, introverted person, people would be fascinated. I'd be dominating these conversations, and whether it's the Trump angle or the ADHD or the intersection, and I try to pitch this book to publishers. And this is in 2018. I have the book written already. They're saying, oh, the market on Trump books is saturated already. And it's like, there have been 6 bestsellers every year since then on Trump. The market isn't saturated. And still, newspaper article after article talks about the chaos, talks about how he doesn't prepare, doesn't follow through. Is impulsive, can't sit still. Oh, he's a narcissist. It's like, none of those are narcissism. Those are all ADHD. So it's not just something that's there, it's something that helps you understand. So those are 2/3 of my book. The last third of my book was how our whole society is changing in a more ADHD-like direction. And some of that gets a lot of attention is the cell phones and computer technology, and how we're continually being interrupted, we're continually being bombarded by realms of information, but not just bombarded, we are required to respond immediately. So our impulse control is deteriorating, our attention span's deteriorating, our ability to sit and concentrate is deteriorating. The tech world is pushing that forward, but it's also, there's lots of feedback loops. And if you have a leader who and they've clearly weaponized it in this administration more than they did in his first term, but he throws out 600 bizarre ideas a day, and you have to comment on them or process them because he's on to another 600 the next day. That's feeding our own ADHD-ness. And there are other, feedback loops other than the tech loop and the, disruptions of sleep patterns, poor diets. All of those are associated with more ADHD, and the more ADHD you have or display, the more likely you are to keep engaging in these behaviors that are pushing us as a society and as individuals further along this pathway. So,
and I wanted to, go back to the Trump derangement syndrome part for a second, and then ask you, how does weaponizing mental health terminology like Trump derangement syndrome, or even using it as a term to describe people, affect the way that we look at our professionals in mental health professionals, and how we look at their, I guess, of how legitimate, and we think of them, if they're legitimate or not? How does it affect a person when they use this terminology publicly and say it's real?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of work on stigma, and some people think that stigma comes from labeling things like, oh, he has ADHD, but the real deeper research suggests people with mental illnesses tend to be stigmatized because their behavior is different from what society is used to. And that in general, finding labels, if they are accurate and helpful, can be a way out of stigmatizing, and essentially they're an explanation. They're not an excuse, but whether it's schizophrenia, whether it's ADHD, whether it's bipolar disorder, whether, Joe didn't come in for work, for 2 weeks, is he lazy? Is he avoiding work? Or was he clinically depressed? Those distinctions matter, and I think the overwhelming evidence is that labels, if they are accurately used and supportively used, can help people both who are suffering from it understand, and their friends and family if they want to. So the danger of misusing labels and just throwing them around and using them as attacks is it does denigrate the whole field. It does denigrate everyone with any mental health conditions. And clearly one of the very explicit goals of this administration has been to attack any other sources of authority. Military leaders, independent judges, the universities and educated elite. It wants to be the one in charge of answering, what is true, what is right, what is wrong, what is, attacking the media. Particularly media that present both sides of the equation or present sides that aren't in agreement with the administration. This administration's been extremely aggressive and serious about eliminating other sources of information or thought.
Okay, and so I guess my last question will be something, could using the Trump derangement syndrome diagnosis on people be something that the administration wants professionals to start doing to take away criticism from the president? We have seen then right now the White House doesn't allow, if you're not part of their press group, you're not allowed to go in. If you criticize the president publicly, you're most likely to end in what we can classify, quote unquote, like his dark list or whatever. Do you feel that now that diagnosis is kind of like what the administration would want for everyday people like me, or like everyday Joes on the street, to be like also put in a list, like they're just crazy, they're not, or like mentally ill, they're not really like hating on the president?
Yeah, it's clearly Trump himself has used the term and used it to discredit his critics. What's incredibly hard, again, either for his supporters or his opponents, is to predict how far is he going to push anything at all. And some of that's his ADHD. He throws out a bunch of ideas off the top of his head. He doesn't censor them. The ones that stick or resonate, he keeps repeating over and over again. But even issues that he repeats, is he actually going to follow up and try to make sure there's legislation or action from it? I'd be a fool if I tried to predict what he or they are actually going to do. But I'd say, again, that there is a concerted effort to discredit people who are offering different points of view. And, psychiatry in the past, again, this is part of the APA's wariness about getting involved in politics. Psychiatry, particularly in other countries, but even in this country, has been misused. So, if we go back a century and a half, and again, then there was no official DSM list of diagnoses, but there were members of organized of psychiatry who were supporters of slavery who coined the term drapetomania. This is 1851. Drapetomania was the claim that people who were in bondage and slavery, who were fleeing it, were somehow delusional because slavery was such a nice, exercise that taught people good, useful life skills as they want to promote down in Florida and Georgia. But again, so this was, again, it wasn't ever endorsed by all of psychiatry. That psychiatry is a less cohesive entity then, but that was one example of clearly political statements being used by some segment of mental health, and clearly going on right now in China and in Russia, and for the last 50 years, a number of opponents of the administrations, who's ever been in power for those times, have used trumped up psychiatric diagnoses to imprison their opponents and either kill them or, sentence them to forced labor. And given that our president overtly, repeatedly is emulating and admiring those countries or practices, that is scary. But I clearly don't see the current establishment of the American psychiatric going along. So again, in the article I was writing about it, there's a fairly long, involved process that tries to be science-based before a diagnosis include. And part of this is many people view or label the DSM as a Bible, that the psychiatrists say, this is the law, this is the rules, and you must, this is how it is. And that analogy is just completely off base. The people who wrote it and the people who work with it acknowledge this is more like a road atlas when we used road atlases. This is a collection of maps of the terrain of mental health problems of when people are going off the tracks. And what we're trying to put in there are things we can verify. And as we learn more, this system we have now will absolutely change and adapt. That's a scientific process. So many, what I will call the right now, completely don't understand the scientific process. They think science is about coming with the fact, and that this fact is going to be in opposition to the Bible or whatever our great leader Trump is saying. And one is a faith-based approach and one is a science-based approach. The faith-based approach says, these are the rules, this is how they're set. We may have people interpreting them differently and arguing and fighting about that. But there's no exploration, there's no consideration that we need to test hypotheses and see if they actually correlate with what's going on in the real world. So, for example, getting, the Trump people interfering with science and social policy, Trump's issued statements about gender identity and sex that are just blatantly, clearly false. They are wrong. Do they have lots of people who support them? Yes. Does that make it true? No. Is everyone who's born easily assigned male or female? Absolutely not. Is that just a product of our culture? No. It's been found pretty much in any species we look at. It's found in pretty much any human society we've looked at. But according to the Trumpists, they've declared you're either male or female at birth, and that's clear cut. For most people, it might be, but clearly it's wrong if you're saying that's true for everyone. So they are already subverting science for social aims. So yes, we should be scared about, what they might do with terms like Trump derangement syndrome.
Absolutely. And then, so do you mind sharing, if someone wanted to find your book, Recognizing Adult ADHD, what Trump teaches about ADHD, where would they go to find it, to buy it?
So it's on Amazon, it's on Barnes & Nobles, you can get it through independent book sites. It's available, as a hard copy, as a paperback, and a good college friend who is a professional actor actually did the voice or the book reading of it. So it's available on Nook and I'm not blanking out, different audiobook formats. So it's there. And again, my first year of writing on Medium, the challenge I put to myself was to write one essay a week on different aspects. It was mostly, again, trying to educate people about ADHD, but it was using Trump, a different example of what he had done in the week or 2 weeks before, to build on or magnify some aspect of ADHD that either may be well known or not so well known. So for 52 weeks, I was able to do that without repeating a topic once. He's, again, he is the poster boy for adult ADHD, and people hate it when I say that. So the book, I was naive when I wrote the book, again, I'm thinking it was a teaching opportunity. What it turned out, I wasn't that surprised that the MAGA crowd, anything that says he isn't a god, then you're evil. Although I've had family members, so they read it because I'm a family member, who are on the right, and most of them said, this was really helpful. I don't like the guy any better more. I still identify with this party, but this helped me understand and make more sense of what's going on. I thought, I tried to talk in front of some Democratic groups, and they said, you're making excuses for his behavior. We don't want this out there. We think he's an evil demon, and anything that humanizes him is bad. And then the ADHD group said, we don't want you to come speak to us. We don't want to think that everyone with ADHD is like this. And what I say is, ADHD is an important part of who he is. It's significant, but it's not all of who he is. Just like you don't reject, he's a man too. Do we reject all men? He's an American. Do we reject all Americans? No, it's one aspect of who he is, and it's an important one. But does that mean he's like every other individual with ADHD? No, but so ADHD groups weren't interested in it, and organized psychiatry is clearly not at all, wants me to shut up and go away. So, again, I think there's potential interest. I think this has deep explanatory power. And I think, again, waking people up, not just about what's Trump's doing and going on, but also about ADHD are important goals. I'll sort of add in one other thing. ADHD shouldn't be seen as a purely bad thing. ADHD is a form of neurodivergence. It means your brain is working differently. And in terms of staying on time, staying organized, that may cause problems with our current society. But many people with ADHD come across as more energetic, more creative. They're more willing to think outside the box. Many of them have an infectious enthusiasm. And one particular feature that Trump has really capitalized on is, again, this lack of censorship. He is willing to say what's ever at the top of his mind without trying to censor it. That he parlayed into, I am more honest, I am more true, I am, than Hillary or Obama, who have to think a minute before they give you an answer. What he, I think intentionally, and most of his followers do unintentionally, they're mistaking candor for honesty. Just spewing what's at the top of your mind might be completely candid. Again, with Trump, we've seen it changes day to day anyway, but that doesn't mean it's honest or true. And in fact, demonstrably, he's much less honest than any other president we've had by, orders of magnitude. It's not subtle. It's not close. But again, he could pitch it as, here I am telling you, calling it like it is. I'm real. I'm authentic. And that turned out to be a huge political asset in at least 2 elections.
I mean, yeah, it has helped him get to the White House twice. So whatever he's doing, sadly, we can't say he's doing it wrong, because he got more than half of the population of the United States following him right now. So again, sadly, we can't really say that he's doing something that is wrong.
And I would point out, because this, again, it's our whole society's moving us. So, when Abraham Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address, the guy who talked before him talked for more than an hour. The Gettysburg Address was a few minutes. The reporters at the time said, we're not even going to pay attention to this speech. It's so short, it's meaningless. In this day and age, if any politician spoke for as long as the Gettysburg Address, it's like, what are the sound clips? What are the bites? Who cares what you said? So Trump, in that world, or even the world of 30 years ago, would have been inconceivable. It's only because our own society has moved so far on the ADHD spectrum towards shorter attention span, less sustained concentration, more demand for, has to be interesting, has to give us a hit of dopamine if that's what it's doing.
Yeah. So with that, is there like anything you want to add, or also how can we, if people were to look for you online, how can they find you?
So I have a YouTube channel under Dr. John Kruse, where I have, again, 200 plus videos on mostly ADHD and mental health topics. Again, some of them are depression and suicide and other aspects. I write on medium.com, which is one of the largest writing platforms in the world, but it is one you need a subscription. I think it's $60 a year. There I'm under Dr. John Kruse, and I've written 500,000 words in the last 5 years. I do have another book coming out that's, again, not on the politics, but on the ADHD and how that's something that exists on a spectrum, and so that'll be out next year sometime. So that's, and I also have a subreddit under Dr. John Kruse. So, and I'm happy to engage in conversations on these topics. I'm not particularly interested in name calling. So on my, a few people on my article on Trump derangement syndrome were essentially saying, that's what you have, that doesn't interest me. But if someone really has a thought out objection to what I've said, I'm happy to engage in them if they have a different opinion. That's how we all learn.
Absolutely. Well, I don't have anything else, but I do want to thank you for joining me today and being a part of this. This is a very important topic to, bring to people out here. And after the last episode, I think this one also can help people to understand more of this term and the terminology behind it and how it can be used. It can be used to pretty much diminish people. So I'm very glad that we can talk and understand more of this from psychology perspective, for sure.
Thanks. Enjoyed the opportunity to talk with you, and I hope your audience gets something out of this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for listening. If you are enjoying Político, make sure to listen and follow on all podcasting platforms. If you are interested in learning more about the topic that we spoke today, follow the show notes at www.politicopod.com. Político is an Inquisitor Media original production hosted by me, Juan Collado Díaz. If you want to learn more about the work we do on our advocacy work, make sure to follow or visit Político at www.politicopod.com.